Welcome. So we've had a bit of a tumultuous January, and therefore there was a significant gap in between our lesson on the book of Exodus and our lesson on the Ten Commandments. So just a quick recap of where we were in the biblical timeline, right? Moses and the Israelite people have reached Mount Sinai, and Moses goes up onto the mountain. And he is there for several days and several nights where he prays with God, and God instructs him to draft a set of commandments, a set of laws created by God for the Israelite people to observe and obey. And we as Catholics, we refer to these laws, or this particular set out of the laws that God gave the Israelites. For he gave the Israelites a lot of laws, quite a multitude of laws, in fact. But we refer to this set as the Ten Commandments. So what we as Catholics, alongside most, if not all, Christians and Jews, call the Ten Commandments are derived from one part of the Bible. Exodus chapter 20, Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 17. So if we look at this particular section of the book of Exodus, we get this. The Ten Commandments. Then God delivered all these commandments. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that place of slavery. You shall not have other gods besides me. You shall not carve idols for yourselves in the shape of anything in the sky above, or on the earth below, or in the waters beneath the earth. You shall not bow down before them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, inflicting punishment for their fathers' wickedness on the children of those who hate me, down to the third and fourth generation, but bestowing mercy down to the thousandth generation of the children of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave unpunished him who takes his name in vain. Remember to keep holy the Sabbath day. 6 days you may labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. No work may be done then either by you or your son or daughter, or your male or female slave, or your beast, or by the alien who lives with you. In 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But on the seventh day he rested. That is why the Lord has blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that you may have a long life in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male or female slave, nor his ox or ass, nor anything else that belongs to him. So that's that segment. Now, a couple of words of clarification. This sense ass means donkey. Alien means a foreigner, someone living within the country that is not a citizen of that country. Now, let's take a look at this segment for a moment. As you'll notice, it's a rather long segment. And while we have broken up into verses and commandments, you really can structure it in a few different ways. What I'm going to show you is the way most Catholics structure it. Quick word of warning. What we call commandment 1, many of our Protestant and Jewish brothers and sisters separate into commandments 1 and 2, and 9 and 10, which we separate the coveting commandments. A lot of them will lump together as one prohibition on coveting. So if you are by any chance looking at a Protestant Bible or a Jewish Bible, or sacred literature produced by either of them, they may enumerate the 10 commandments differently. But regardless, all of the rules are basically still in there. All the things you're told not to do or to do are, in fact, still in there. Okay, awesome. So let's talk about the 10 commandments. Now, you'll notice they're separated like this. Now, one of the things rather interesting about the commandments is when Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? Jesus gives potentially one of the greatest answers and non-answers you'll ever hear. He says, to love the Lord your God with all your strength, with all your heart, and with all your soul. That is the first commandment. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. This, of course, quite succinctly sums up all 10 commandments in 2 statements. And if you're having trouble remembering that, think of them like this. Commandments 1 through 3 govern our relationship with God. Commandments 4 through 10, our relationship with other people, right? So what are the 10 commandments per se? Right, so the first one, I, the Lord, am your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that place of slavery. You shall not have other gods besides me. You shall not carve idols for yourselves in the shape of anything in the sky above or on the earth below or in the waters beneath the earth. You shall not bow down before them or worship them. Commandment 2, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Commandment 3, remember to keep holy the Sabbath day. Commandment 4, honor your father and your mother, that you may have a long life in the land which the Lord your God is giving to you. Commandment 5, you shall not kill. Commandment 6, you shall not commit adultery. Commandment 7, you shall not steal. Commandment 8, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Commandment 9, you shall not covet your neighbor's goods. And Commandment 10, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. Awesome. So let's go over them, because I think a few of you are looking like, okay, this looks pretty easy. I don't think I've been sinning much. And that's an easy way of looking at it. So let's take a look at each of these, because there's a lot more under the surface with any of these commandments. Let's take a look at them. All right, commandment number 1, right? The one which reads, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that place of slavery. You shall not have other gods besides me. You shall not carve idols for yourselves in the shape of anything in the sky above or in the earth below or in the waters beneath the earth. You shall not bow down before them or worship them. Okay. Now, most of you are probably thinking, okay, goody. Whenever it comes to confession, this feels a lot like the free space on the bingo, right? This is, okay, I'd have remembered worshiping another god recently. Didn't do that. Okay, we're good. We're good, right? All right. Commandment 1, check off. All right. Let's move along. Not so fast, because it's not quite that simple. Obviously, worshiping any other false god but the one true God would be a violation of this commandment. But it's not just that. Just because you haven't offered prayers to Thor or Vishnu lately doesn't necessarily mean that you are in the clear. See, what this means is that our highest loyalty is to be to God, right? That our number one devotion is to be to God, and that's above anything else. There's nothing else that we're supposed to place above that devotion, whether that's wealth or money, power, whether we're talking about physical power, physical strength, or political power or influence, self-interest. We're not supposed to put what's good for us above what God has commanded of us or asked of us. Other people, right? We're not supposed to put a family member or a love interest or a figure we admire above the admiration and the loyalty we give to God. Love of nation is another one, right? At the end of the day, as we talked about with the Feast of Christ the King, as Catholics, our first loyalty is always to Jesus Christ. And then second, to any earthly ruler or political movement. That may come second or third or wherever you choose to place it, but it cannot come first. If your answer is, well, my devotion to my country or my party or my political movement comes before my identity as a Catholic, before my devotion to God, then that is just as much a violation of Commandment 1 as if you were, you know, burning incense to Poseidon. There's no difference. Now, there's also now, before we move on to a prohibition on idolatry, a couple things. I'm not saying any of these interests are inherently negative in and of themselves. I'm not saying you can't place a value on money. I'm not saying you can't place a value on power or influence or self-interest or other people in your life and their well-being or your nation or your political movement. That's not what I'm saying, that you have to, wipe them all out of your mind. No. But it's about priority, right? If you're looking at one of these other causes and you're saying, well, that matters more to me than my devotion to God, that's where this becomes a problem, right? If you're more interested in accruing money or power than being a disciple of Jesus, that's when you're crossing over into that worshiping other gods territory. Now, what about idolatry? That's a word we don't use very much. So let's talk about what an idol is and what it isn't. So, and this is odd because I got to clear up a few things with this. So let's talk about it. So first, so an idol is a statue wherein a deity is believed to dwell. So in olden times, a lot of different religions used to believe that their god or goddess literally lived inside a statue. So, for example, the old statue of Athena that used to appear in the Acropolis, up on the Acropolis in Athens, was an example of this. Up in the Parthenon, that statue was an idol. The Athenian people literally believed that this thing lived in the statue, that it was the statue. That's what an idol is. And so one of the rules that the Israelites are being told is, one, not only can you not have other gods, but also to understand that you can't make a statue of God, as in God the one and only, and think, oh, God lives in that statue. The statue is God. No, it's not how that works. Now, please note, unless one believes a statue to be a god, it is not an idol. Please understand this. A lot of times, many well-meaning people, including many of our Protestant brothers and sisters, will say foolish things like, oh, Catholics worship idols. You go into a Catholic church and there's crucifixes, and there's statues of Mary and statues of saints and angels, and there's all this statuary. It's idolatry. No, it's not. It's decoration. It's veneration and decoration, but it's not idolatry, because we do not believe that God lives in the statues, right? God or Mary or the saints don't actually live in the statues any more than the soul of George Washington resides within the Washington Monument, So having religious statues is no more acceptable or unacceptable than any other statues we make of individuals we hold in esteem. So when we make, it's no different than when a local government chooses to make a war memorial or a statue of a known civil rights leader or a known general or something like that. It's no different than monuments like this. The same way that if you go to Washington, D.C., if you go to various buildings, there's statues and busts and, engravings of various Americans that we as a country hold in high esteem. If you walk into a Catholic church, you're going to see visual depictions of Jesus and God, as well as the saints that we hold in high esteem. So that's all there is to that. Now, you may be saying, okay, I don't even make statues, let alone a statue I think is fancy enough that God lives in it. So I am definitely clear on this one, Mr. Skanga. Not quite. Because to make something an idol for ourselves is when we direct our worship and reverence toward that which would ordinarily be reserved for God. So to put it on a pedestal, if you will, that would normally be reserved for God, right? Now, obviously, right? And again, a lot of these are the same things: wealth, power, status symbols, fame, love interests, family members, celebrities, political leaders. And it's not saying that we can't give these things respect or esteem or hold them in high regard. Obviously, we're going to hold love interests and family members in high regard. If we're following someone politically, we obviously think well of them, right? We obviously hold them in some kind of regard or esteem, or else we wouldn't be listening to what they say. Now, would we? But there's a difference between that sort of respect and an almost worshipful reverence when we're looking at them like they're a god. They can say no wrong, do no wrong. What they say is the reality. That's when we start to get into a weird territory where we're getting dangerously into the territory of making them an idol. And that's a dangerous sin to be committing. So keep that in mind. All right, commandment 2. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Very simple. Use the name of God and Jesus reverently, right? And don't swear to do something, don't be like, I swear to God I will do this or that, if you do not intend to do it, right? So don't use it in a false oath. Don't use it irreverently, whether that's in a false oath or by cursing. And the same goes for the names of Mary and the saints. Again, just a little respect. All right, commandment 3. Remember to keep holy the Sabbath day. Very simple one here. Right? Now, for us as Catholics, the Sabbath is Sunday. And that means one, refrain from unnecessary work on Sundays and holy days. Right? So, now, again, we get it. Some people, their career, their livelihood, what they got to do just to survive, they may not be able to take a Sunday off. It does happen. But if you are in a position where you can refrain from work on a Sunday, you should do so, or on certain holy days like Christmas, Easter, certain saints' days. If you are in a position to do so, do it. It also means setting time aside for prayer, scripture, and reflections on God. Right? That at some point we have to take a time out of our schedule, out of the things that we want, out of things that the world wants, to make some time for God. And this also means as Catholics to attend Mass as regularly as possible, especially on Sundays and holy days. Now, I get it. In the age of COVID-19, that's not going to be as possible. And with a pandemic going on. That means you may not be able to attend Mass weekly or monthly or even annually for health reasons. And that's understandable. It just means if you are able to, do so. But if you're not able to, don't. Obviously, it's not going to do any good to God or to the faith if we are spreading pestilence among the faithful. It's not going to be doing anyone any good. All right, commandment number 4. Honor your father and your mother, that you may have long life in the land which the Lord your God is giving to you. This just means show respect for your parents. It also does blanket over to some extent other proper authority figures, police, teachers, priests, etc. Right? That's all that means. Commandment number 5. Now, this is another one a lot of people tend to think, okay, I got this one in the bag. This one's real simple. You shall not kill. In fact, that's pretty much it. One of the shortest directives you're ever going to get in the Bible. In fact, in Hebrew, it's even shorter. Lo tirtzach, or don't murder, or don't commit homicide. Tirtsak is a little awkward to translate into English, but that's the gist of it, basically. Don't murder anybody. All right. That sounds pretty simple. Don't kill anyone. Okay. Think I can do that? That seems easy enough to understand. So where's the catch, you're probably thinking? Because I thought that about Commandment 1, and there's more on the page, and you'd be absolutely correct. So as Catholics, we hold that human life is sanctified, that is sacred. From conception until natural death, meaning from the moment that an individual comes into being in their mother's womb, all the way up to the time they draw their last breath, that life is something sacred and is imbued with a particular human dignity and value. And the Catholics have a moral duty to uphold the value of human life, both against judicial and extrajudicial threats. So often when we picture murder or a murderer, we're picturing a criminal element, right? We're picturing, the proverbial axe murderer from a horror movie, or the proverbial hired gunman that we hear about on the evening news. And while those would certainly be murderers, what we would call extrajudicial murderers, right? Those who operate outside the law, we are not only called to condemn or to oppose the actions of these kind of individuals, but also individuals that are permitted to take human life within the bounds of the law. So I'm going to now ask you a bit of a riddle. So how many of you have heard the claim that the Inuit people have 50 different words for snow? Take a moment to think if you've ever heard this phrase before. If you've not, no big deal, because it's not 100% accurate. They have a whole 50 words for snow. But it is true that in the native Inuit language, there are more words for snow or for various types of precipitation that we, in the English language, would only refer to as snow. You may be asking, well, why? Why on earth would a language have more words for something? And the answer has a lot to do with the fact of what's around them, right? To us, most of us, with the English language, living in where we live, and a part of the world that experiences 4 seasons, we only experience snow for about a quarter of the year. And because we only experience snow for about a quarter of a year, if we're lucky, we really only need one word to describe the solid white watery precipitation that floats down from the sky: snow. Now imagine you're a traditional Inuit individual living up near the Arctic Circle. In those parts of the world, snow and ice are part of the landscape almost year-round in some places entirely all year round. And therefore, differentiating between the different kinds of frozen precipitation might mean more, right? Because now that's a way of differentiating different parts of the environment in a way that individuals in an area where snow is less common wouldn't have to. It's even why you may have some languages closer to the equator that really don't have a word for snow, or at least didn't have one until comparatively recently, when they encountered folks who did know about it and then tried to explain what this was. And the reason why I bring this up is not just to have a fun conversation about language or anything, but it raises an interesting idea that what we have multiple words for reflects that which is part of our reality and part of what is an element of our daily life and culture. Keeping that in mind, I'm now going to ask you a less fun question. What might it say about us that we have so many names for murder? This is not an exhaustive list, by the way, but here are a few. Oh goodness, I even forgot a couple. Here we go. Here's a short list. Homicide, coming from the Latin homo, meaning man, as in human. Think Homo sapien, the scientific name for human. Side, meaning to kill. Murder of a person. Genocide, from the word genos, meaning a people, collectively, like a group of people. Side, to kill, the murder of an entire group of people, the attempt to kill an entire race, religion, or ethnicity off. Suicide, the murder of oneself. Democide, the murder of an entire city. Infanticide, the murder of an infant. Patricide, murder of one's father. Fratricide, murder of one's siblings. Matricide, murder of one's mother. Regicide, murder of one's king. Deicide, the murder of God. This is the official sin of Caiaphas, Pontius Pilate, and the various Pharisees involved in the corrupt trial and subsequent crucifixion of Jesus. This particular sin is on their heads and is pretty much limited to their heads. So, just a warning on that one. That one's kind of their particular trouble, lest we have to climb back up the list and talk about anything else. Let's continue. Abortion, murder of an unborn child. Euthanasia, murder of the ill or elderly by medical personnel. Assisted suicide, when a physician helps end the life of a patient who has requested death. And that's not even an exhaustive list of the words we have for murder. For example, it has occurred to me that in a gross oversight, I missed the word lynching, referring to a hanging of an individual without legal cause to do so, usually motivated on grounds of racial prejudice or other spurious cause. So we have a long laundry list of words, and that probably says a lot about us as a culture. Why do we have so many words for murder? I mean, after all, you're looking through this list and you're seeing at least 10 different words for murder. And this idea is something that the Holy Father in Rome is very concerned about. So His Holiness St. Pope John Paul II warned of something he called the culture of death. And this idea is very intricately intertwined with the throwaway culture mentioned by His Holiness Pope Francis. And what both pontiffs decry, what both pontiffs view as problematic, is a modern culture that sees human beings and human life as disposable, right? People are something, and their lives are something to be used so long as they are useful, and thrown away, discarded the second they become inconvenient or cease to be useful. And Catholics are called upon to resist such influence and to insist upon the value of every human life. Now, some of this involves opposition to things that are relatively unpopular in our modern day age and culture, like genocide. You don't see a lot of Americans going around advocating genocide. And if you do, you might want to steer clear of those people. They're probably not mentally stable. FYI. Also, maybe alert some law enforcement. I don't know. Abortion, right? One of the biggest issues with which the Catholic faith has had to contend in America and in much of the Western world is the issue of abortion. That in America, it is permissible to terminate a pregnancy, as to kill an unborn child while they're still in the womb. And this is a grievous moral sin. Euthanasia, policy of killing off the elderly or ill. Surprisingly, this is legal in several states out west, out in the Northwest. I believe Montana, I want to say it's Montana, legalized euthanasia a while back. Or at the very least, some kind of assisted suicide, and they're leading towards that direction. And then finally, death penalty. Yep, the pro-life pendulum swings both ways. While many on the political left are not so happy about Catholic prohibition on abortion, many on the political right wing are none too pleased about Catholic prohibition of death penalty. It is the position of His Holiness Pope Francis that death penalty is not compatible with the sanctity of human life, and therefore it is not considered appropriate for a Catholic to take part in committing in an execution, nor to request an execution or order one as a jury or a judge or things like that. These also remain legal in numerous U.S. states. And that is something else to take a note on. All right, now a note on suicide. I mentioned suicide earlier under the list of murders, and I need to clarify a couple of points. Here is the church's ruling regarding suicide. An individual who takes their own life is not regarded to be mentally in their right mind. Sort of depression or other sorts of strong mental illness, and therefore they are not guilty of any sin or crime because they are not in their right mind when they made the decision to take their own life. So an individual who is struggling with self-harm or with suicidal thoughts, or if you know someone who has, God forbid, taken their own life, does not mean that they're in any kind of trouble, with God or with anything like that or with the church. Now, that being said, knowingly aiding in the commission of a suicide and or seriously encouraging someone to commit suicide is a mortal sin. So while an individual who is depressed or struggling and mentally, if they should choose to take their own life in the midst of that mental darkness, that's not really a sin. They're suffering from a grievous mental illness. But if someone volunteers to help them end their own life, or harasses or otherwise drives them to committing that point, that person may well have a mortal sin to answer for. All right. Whenever we mention killing and the rules against thou shalt not kill, it is almost always brought up, well, what about war? What about war? What about soldiers in war? And I understand this, especially as Americans with a country that's been in a war for the past 20 years now. So I understand why this would be an obvious question. And the answer to this is, look, the taking of human life is inevitable in the course of war. Killing in war has been recognized as morally permissible, provided that the conflict is classified as a just war. So those who take a life in the midst of a just war are not guilty of murder. So you may be asking, well, what does it mean that a war is just? That refers, so St. Augustine proposed a variety of criteria for what a just war is. But generally, such conflicts are defensive in nature. So it's a country trying to defend itself, trying to protect itself, or trying to defend or protect another country or another group of people within a country that cannot protect themselves. It's not oriented upon conquest. Please note, occupation and conquest is a thin line, but are not synonymous. And one in which it's engaged in once diplomacy has failed to form a just peace, meaning that an attempt has been made to solve the problem diplomatically, and either the other party in this conflict has refused to come to the table, or what options they present once they are offered peace are not morally acceptable terms. So a country that says it's it it won't go to war if it's permitted to murder its own citizens or something like that. That's not a just peace. That's not, a country would not be in violation of just war if it refused to accept peace terms that contained a provision such as that. I'm hoping that makes sense. All right. Self-defense. Obviously, there's always going to be a few questions about that. What about self-defense? Violence, including lethal violence, engaged in to protect one's own life and or the life of another, is similarly not classified as murder. So if you have to, heaven forbid, use lethal violence to protect yourself or someone close to you, that is not in and of itself murder. All right, commandment number 6, you shall not commit adultery. This means 1, respecting your own body and the bodies of others. Don't, touch anybody in a manner they do not wish to be touched. And to respect the sanctity of marriage, right? The relationship between a married couple is a special one formed in the sacrament of holy matrimony. And as a result of this, it is not something that, should be broken up. It's nothing you should meddle in or try to break up a married couple or something like that. That's the rule with that. All right, commandment number 7. You shall not steal. AKA, do not take things that do not belong to you. This includes cheating people out of their money, labor, or valuables. So it's not just the person who, robs a bank or steals something from a store. It's also the person who underpays their employee or, deliberately tells someone a product is worthless when they know it is worth more. Things like that. Commandment number 8, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. This is a prohibition against deceit, against lying. And especially when that deceit is intended to harm or defame another. Think bear false witness, literally as in testifying falsely, right? So especially if the lie you tell is intended to harm somebody else by getting them into legal trouble or destroying their reputation or otherwise causing them harm, that is problematic. It also prohibits lying by omission. This means deceiving another by withholding pertinent information. So the proverbial, well, I didn't lie, I just didn't say this or that, or I didn't mention it. No, that's playing word games. No. Now, as per conversations with our pastor, harmless lies told for the benefit of another, so-called white lies, are permissible. And as a general rule of thumb, lies told in order to save a life are also morally permissible, right? So if you see someone hiding from, or you see someone run through and they're screaming about a murderer, and next thing you know, you see a knife-wielding individual and they ask which way that person went, you are under no moral obligation to give that person an honest answer. If you lie in that situation, that is perfectly acceptable. So if you are lying to save a life, that is perfectly permissible. Don't feel you any way about that. All right, so what does it mean to covet? Now, our last 2 commandments both deal with the subject of coveting, not coveting your neighbor's goods and not coveting your neighbor's spouse. So what does that mean? What does it even mean to covet something? Well, to covet something is to want something, but not in the sense of wanting something like what another has, but wanting that specific thing which they possess. So, as in you want to take it away from them, right? You want to take it from them and make it yours. That's to covet, right? So let's look at our 2 coveting commandments. So you shall not covet your neighbor's goods, i.e., you do not desire to take your neighbor's material possessions for yourself. Now, it is permissible to to aspire to have things like your neighbor, right? So if you see your neighbor has, his house has a nice pool and you're like, oh, I want a pool like that. That's not coveting, right? That's just aspiring. You're like, hey, what he has looks nice. I think I want one of those too one day. That's fine. That's not coveting. Coveting is, I want to take it away from him and have it be mine. So let's use that pool. I want to take his pool and put it in my yard. I want him not to have it and me to have it. That's coveting. That's what gets problematic. I want to take it away from him or her or whatever and give it to me. Right? Take it away from that person and give it to me. That's coveting. That's a problem. The same goes with the commandment, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. It means do not desire to take your neighbor's spouse as your own. Now, it's permissible to want a relationship like one that your neighbor has. The proverbial, you see the happy couple out and you're like, oh, I want that. Meaning, I want to have, or I want to have what they have, like that. No, that's fine. That's not a problem. It's normal to want to have a strong, committed relationship like what you see another couple have. In fact, that's even why many parishes will hold up couples that have been married 50 or 60 years as inspiration to the rest of the parish. Like, look at how strong their marriage is. You want a marriage like that. You want a relationship like that. That's fine to aspire to have a similarly close relationship. The problem is when you say you want someone else's spouse to choose you over them, right? When you're like, oh, I wish she was married to me, not him, or whatever, that's where the problem comes in. That's where you enter into the territory of coveting. All right. Types of sins. One of the last things we have to discuss is there are two types of sins, mortal and venial. So mortal sins are serious sins. These are ones that actually break our relationship with God. They're very dangerous to the welfare of our immortal soul. Whereas venial sins are minor offenses. They only harm our relationship with God, but they don't break it. Now, even a relationship with God that's broken can still be repaired through penance and reconciliation, but it's a much more serious transgression. Now, a few of you may be asking, okay, well, what are mortal sin? What might be examples of mortal versus venial sins? So let's talk about some of the big ones. Mortal sins tend to be some ones that are pretty much mortal sins right off the bat. Any violation of commandment 1 tends to be considered a mortal sin. Any violation of commandment 5, the one against murder, also is an almost instantaneous mortal sin. And generally, violations of the anti-adultery commandment are also mortal. Ones that tend to be more venial probably are going to involve things more along the lines of taking the Lord's name in vain, tends to be regarded more as a venial. Again, there are exceptions. If you swore an oath, and you swore, in the name of God that you would do this, that, or the other thing, that might be more serious. That might get more towards mortal territory. But if you're in traffic and someone cuts you off and you say Lord's name in vain, it's probably more of a venial thing. Doesn't mean it's good, but it's not like big. Lying, bearing false witness, that's going to range all over the spectrum. Depends what you're lying about, right? Lying, about, lying that you ate that cookie before dinner, venial. Lying that you saw someone get murdered, it's going to be a little more serious. It really depends what you're lying about. So those are the types of sins. So I hope you enjoyed our discussion here on the 10 Commandments. Next class, we're going to start looking much more closely at the beginning of the nation of Israel.